Hello CTO Demon channel friends, welcome back to the channel. Today is another core curriculum talk, ReverseCART4, the last of the talks on ReverseCART. Well, maybe not the last, but the last for now. ReverseCART is a big passion of mine, and maybe I'll think of another talk to do sometimes later on. But this talk really is about the ways we can complete ReverseCART quicker and more efficiently and more successfully. Now, the reason for this is because ReverseCART is important. Now, some people will argue with me and say, well, Eugene, once we cross the retrograde wire, once we cross the retrograde microcatheter, the case is completed. We're going to be successful 99% of the time. And they are right, of course. Once you've crossed a retrograde microcatheter, 95, 98, 99% of the time, you're going to be successful in the case. It guarantees a very high successful rate having successful retrograde crossing. But by the time you cross retrograde and you do ReverseCART, you're getting tired. The patient is getting tired. And the procedure time is getting long. And so if you can do a fast ReverseCART successfully, that's going to be good for you, good for the patients, and good for the audience. So having a fast ReverseCART is very important. And some of the talks previously will help. And balloon wiring will help. Understanding the IVUS and the arrangement and how to overcome each of the problems will help. Having done lots of IVUS guided ReverseCART will help. But one other very important part is pre-planning the ReverseCART. And this is something that I've done for many years now. When I look at an angio, even before I start puncturing the patient, I pre-plan my ReverseCART. I plan what type of ReverseCART based on the 4 IVUS findings I'm going to do and where am I going to do it in the vessel. So that I'm going to choose the retrograde channel depending on my pre-planned ReverseCART. I'm going to wire the retrograde depending on my pre-planned ReverseCART. I'm going to wire the antegrade depending on my pre-planned ReverseCART. And of course, the pre-planned ReverseCART may change depending on how the wiring goes. So it is best to pre-plan what type of ReverseCART you're going to do. And in order of preference, we want to do A, antegrade intimal, retrograde intimal, both intraplaque. That's the best pre-plan. B, both subintimal. C, antegrade, true lumen, intraplaque, retrograde subintimal. And we don't want, and want to avoid at all costs, antegrade subintimal, retrograde true. So this is the plan. And also, the plan is not only for the CTO, because sometimes the CTO body is very long. So you can have segments where different patterns of IVUS finding will occur. Maybe distally in the CTO, the retrograde is true and the antegrade is subintimal. But maybe as you come more proximal in the mid-body, there may be a part where the retrograde is intraplaque and the antegrade is intraplaque. And maybe more proximally, the retrograde is subintimal and the antegrade is intraplaque. So you could have different patterns throughout one CTO body, especially in long CTOs. And you want to plan it such that you have the right portion of that CTO where you're going to do ReverseCART, and that portion is ideally both intraplaque or both subintimal. Now, there are some CTOs that's easy to plan. There are some CTOs that's got long, tortuous calcified. You know you're going to be knuckling antegrade, knuckling retrograde. You're going to be doing a subintimal connection. So you can already plan that. Still, there's some value in pre-planning because you can look for a spot where it's a bit straighter in that vessel, where it's going to be a bit easier to do subintimal connection between retrograde and antegrade. So you can still pre-plan, but in a very tortuous, calcified, ambiguous vessel, you're going to be antegrading, you're going to be knuckling antegrade and retrograde. So you're going to be subintimal connection. So you just need to plan a straight segment for you to do the subintimal connection. That's the plan. But most cases it's not like that. Most cases are not super tortuous, super calcified. Most cases, there are things you can play with to change the plan. And so I'm going to reference 2 cases that demonstrate this technique. The first is the case that is already published on the channel, the live in the box case. See link in the description below. And that case, you remember, we go to the RCA to do the reverse card, and we started retrograde wiring, and the retrograde wire getting very lost. Okay. Now at that point, instead of knuckling the retrograde wire, which is what is very reasonable to do, it's very reasonable to knuckle the retrograde wire. But if we knuckle the retrograde wire, the retrograde is going to be subintimal. And when we wire antigrade, we don't know whether the antigrade is going to be subintimal or true. There's a chance that we wire antigrade and the antigrade is true. So if we knuckle all the way up and then we wire antigrade, there's a chance we're going to end up with retrograde subintimal, antigrade true. And that's a difficult reverse card. So I didn't want that. So what I did was, instead of before knuckling the retrograde, I started antigrade wiring. I wired a little bit in and I felt the wire and it felt very subintimal. Then it's easy. I know now for the easy connection, I need retrograde subintimal. So I knuckle the retrograde wire. And indeed, in that case, something a little bit funny happened, because you notice that the knuckle of the retrograde XTA was very small. So in fact, although I knuckled, it was an intraplot knuckling. And in fact, I had to get to the proximal part near where the antigrade wire is subintimal, and I reshaped the knuckle of my XTA, making the knuckle nearer the stiffer part of the XTA and a bigger knuckle, and I popped it into the subintimal space, making a subintimal connection. So that is the planned technique, okay? I got to there and I planned to have a same space connection, subintimal proximal, okay? This is the, so this allows for an easy, fast reverse card. Now there's another example which I can post a little bit of the pictures on this video on, which was done in Guangzhou and CTO live case. I think Nakamatsu, that's the chairman that time. It was again an ambiguous long RCA CTO. I crossed the septal, and I did retrograde knuckle already up because I was getting very lost on the retrograde wire. So again, I knuckled the retrograde wire, but I only knuckled up to the mid RCA, and the occlusion started in the proximal RCA. I didn't knuckle all the way up because I wanted the option to change my retrograde wire position between the mid and the proximal RCA. So anyway, I did puncture, and typically what happens with these cases is a little bit of a taper cap. So the antigrade puncture, the wire was in true lumen first, and then it drifted into subintimal. Okay? So in the mid part of the right coronary, the retrograde is subintimal, the antigrade is subintimal. And so my connection would be in the mid right coronary to do a subintimal connection. So I dragged a guide liner down to the mid right, and I changed out the retrograde wire to wire the guide liner. Now, I have to confess here, I wanted to demonstrate end balloon wiring in that case. So I deliberately failed to wire the guide liner by putting the retrograde microcatheter quite close to the guide extension catheter. So this case has also been, the full video has also been on the APCTO Club website. See link in the description below. So those of you who've seen the case know this, that I'm playing around. I'm putting the retrograde microcatheter quite close to the guide liner so I can't wire it. So in the end, what I did was I took it back out, and then I changed for a retrograde wire, high penetration force wire, and I penetrate back into the plaque, and then did end balloon wiring in the proximal part of the RCA. You see, because I've reserved the proximal part of the RCA without knuckling up, so that I still have the option of changing the retrograde wire position from subintimal back into interplaque for an easy connection. So this is planning ahead. Obviously, there's a lot of planning that one can do for each CTO on where to do reverse card. But having the concept of planning ahead to see how can I make the two wires both overlap in the same space is very important. Now, one final little tip for a connection in reverse card. Because often both antegrade and retrograde is going to begin in true lumen. Well, before the proximal and distal cap, they are definitely in true lumen. Okay? And as you wire, both antegrade and retrograde are going to go subintimal, because failure of wiring usually means you've gone subintimal. So what you have is antegrade true to false, retrograde from true to false towards antegrade, which means when you go through the coronary artery. In proximal, antegrade true, retrograde false. There is a point in the middle where antegrade and retrograde are both intraplanar, and in the distal, there's a place where antegrade is subintimal, retrograde is intraplanar. Now, it may be that the point that both antegrade and retrograde are intraplanar is very short. So you can imagine, antegrade can go intraplanar and suddenly pop out in the subintimal, and retrograde can go intraplanar and pop out the subintimal, and they almost pop out at the same point. Okay? Or the retrograde pops out first, more distally, and antegrade pops out more proximally. So the overlap between the wires, there must be one point where they are both intraplanar or they are both subintimal. So usually there is a point where the two wires can make an easy connection, because there's this golden point where they are both intraplanar or they are both subintimal, just by the nature of how wires behave in difficult CTOs. And so being able to locate that point is very important, because that point is the easiest point to do reverse cart. That's the golden point. In fact, this lesson was taught to me rather painfully many years ago when I was doing a live case in China, and the opposite side was Tsuchikani was doing a live case. And I think he did one of his amazing live cases. He completed the case in 45 minutes, retrograde case. And I was struggling, and I was on my 4th hour. I was doing an apical epicardial channel that was causing some ischemia. And so I have to, back things off and rest a little bit. And I actually got through the channel very quickly, but the reverse cart was just murder. Couldn't do the reverse cart for ages and ages and ages. Couldn't get the IVUS down antegrade. And so I was struggling, and we didn't have a good IVUS in the lab. So couldn't get it down, and I was struggling and struggling and struggling. And I took every idea from a 17-person panel, and I tried it all, and it didn't work. And I was really desperate, and I was shouting out to Tsuchikani, help me, help me. And he was not being helpful at all. But finally, he just came in, he saw my desperation, and out of his great heart of compassion, he said, here, do a reverse cart here. And amazingly, I did it in one shot. I could do it. Now, I didn't know at that time why he said there or how come it worked. But now, of course, after being friends with him and learning a lot from him, I gathered the point. That was the golden point. That was where the antegrade and retrograde cross. And he was so experienced at that point already at finding this point that he could do it without an IVUS. But of course, if you do loads of IVUS, you learn to recognize this point. And recognizing this point is really helpful when you're struggling with reverse cart. So that's all my tips and tricks for you. I hope that you can put all this together and your reverse cart can be faster. It's going to be greatly beneficial to your patients, to your back, and to your audience. So remember the tips and tricks, the use of end balloon wiring. A side balloon wiring is still useful in some cases where you've already done a lot of retrograde wiring or your retrograde wire control isn't good. Remember the use of IVUS and the concepts that bring to how we solve reverse cart. And remember, pre-planning your reverse cart, that's a very powerful tool. So I recommend this to you. I hope you guys have good, easy, smooth reverse carts, and I hope you improve. And if you like the channel, please click the like button and click the subscribe button for future channels. Bye-bye.